Hey, on this episode of the Ethics Experts, we talked to Gerry Zack. He has a background as a fraud examiner, as a public accountant, and he ran HCCA and SCCE for a number of years. So we talk about his background, and then we get into really where our industry is going and what things we need to get good at if we are going to avoid this AI revolution. So I really hope you enjoy it. I hope you enjoy it even a fraction as much as I did. I think this will be one of your favorite episodes. Enjoy.
Welcome to the Ethics Experts, where we're elevating ethics and compliance and HR to the strategic level it's supposed to be.
How you doing?
Good, man. Good to see you. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to you. How are things going?
Things are going pretty good, man. Welcome to the Ethics Experts. Been so excited to get you on.
Yeah, no, me too. Me too. This has been exciting. It's been a highlight on my calendar, actually.
Wow.
And,
okay.
yeah,
very good.
That is not just blowing smoke.
Well, you can blow smoke if you want. I'm fine with that. But yeah, man, let's just let's dive in. You know, you're somebody who's been in this space for a long time. You've had a big impact in the space, given your last role, and I think some of the stuff that you're working on now is going to continue to kind of push our industry forward. So, welcome. Let's just kind of dive in. You know, I always love to start with, you know, your background. How did you get into this space? Well, really kind of before that, like what kind of a kid were you? I can always find some threads that go back to that, but what were you like growing up?
Yeah. I know this is going to shock you, but I was kind of the studious geek type growing up. I wasn't the cool kid. I'm still waiting for my cool kid phase.
Coming.
It's just like it's coming. It's on the way. But yeah, no, I was kind of the studious geek type with a handful. I was never the type that had dozens and dozens of friends. You know, a handful of really close friends that we hung out with and shared interests with. And that was sort of my my nucleus, so kind of the studious type, yet there's always a little bit of a risk taker in there as well. I can tell, I was recently sharing a story with my brother, of something that my buddies and I did when we were like 10 or 12 years old. And my brother was shocked. He was like, you did not really do that.
What's the story?
Well, it involves getting in a little bit of trouble without actually ever getting caught. We just wanted to see these fish in this pond that we knew was a private pond. And it ultimately ended up in like gunfire.
Wow.
Yeah, not on our part. No, we were the ones running away from the gunfire.
Wow. You've been shot at. That's amazing. Yeah.
Yeah. So, every compliance officer should have a story like that. And mine is, yes, I have been shot at for non-compliance.
There's probably a sign or something that you ignored or something.
There is. But, outside of that, I had a great family. My mother was, she was, the upper Pennsylvania person, but spent 10 years of her youth in Harlem, and from her, I learned DEI before DEI was a term. She taught me how to treat people, all people, not just the ones who look like you, and I really got that from her. And my father was an IRS agent, so the whole idea of compliance and catching the bad guys and preventing bad stuff, it was sort of in the blood from that side too.
Totally.
So yeah, I think I was pre-wired for the compliance and ethics profession in a way.
Yeah, that's really like one of the strongest sort of like foundational backgrounds that I've heard. I'd love to hear a little bit more about how she taught you that DEI thing before DEI was a thing. Like, what did that experience of spending 10 years in Harlem, like what impact did that have on her? And how was she able to convey some of those principles or axioms that you still seem to sort of carry forward today?
Yeah, it was never any of that real conscious teaching piece. It was just that observing how she navigated life, and observing how she treated people and her lack of fear, for lack of a better word. It's like the area where we grew up in central Pennsylvania was a very vanilla, kind of a suburb, but we were right across the river from, Harrisburg, which the other people on the West Shore where we grew up were like, oh, don't go to Harrisburg. That's where, all the bad people are and everything. And Mom was there every weekend, so she'd just like find a reason to go into the city. That lack of fear of things that are different from you, cultures and experiences and things like that, just naturally rubs off, when you have a mother like that.
Right.
So, and that extends to people. She didn't see color or religion or anything like that, in people. She was just like, is this a good person or not? And it just, there was never really these conscious learning moments like where she would take me aside and say, so Gerry, this is
Totally.
how you treat people. It just observe it.
Yeah, you just absorbed it kind of just from the way that she was.
Yeah.
So what kind of sets you on that path? You were running from gunfire, these two great parents, one kind of the people side, one kind of the compliance, catching bad guy side. Where did how did you sort of start on that path? What did you do after, high school, and how did you kind of wind up into this compliance ocean that we're all swimming in now?
Yeah. I mean, probably from my father's side, I went into accounting. Because that's, he was the first person in his family to ever get a college education. Most of them never even graduated from high school, and, he got an accounting degree and then got into the Internal Revenue Service as a result. So, hearing and talking about accounting a little bit growing up, I think put me down that accounting path. So when I went to college, my undergraduate degree was in accounting, and I started out on that very traditional public accounting track, working at a CPA firm, and going down that path. My initial goal was to be in public accounting for a couple of years and then become the big CFO type, and I quickly abandoned that only because I was enjoying working with clients and helping more, more clients, rather than focusing on a single organization. So my initial, drive was to work with many different types of organizations. And then as good luck or bad luck would have it, one of the audits that I was working on, I uncovered fraud. It was, it's a situation where our client was a nonprofit hospital group, and in the construction of a new hospital, or I believe it was maybe just an addition to the existing hospital, a big wing to it. I was simply just assigned the routine task of auditing the construction costs, and I knew something just didn't look right. I wasn't even sure what it was, but I just thought, some of this stuff just isn't looking right. So we started looking more carefully. And sure enough, the construction contractor was ripping this organization off blind. I mean, double billing for things, billing for workers who didn't work, billing for also just, you name it. They just had the complete, buffet of fraud in terms of different ways of ripping your client off. And that's what really got me even further down this path of saying, okay, I don't want to do just audit work anymore. I want to do this, because it had two things that really appealed to me. One was the technical challenge, which I've always thrived on some sort of technical challenge. And the technical challenge of investigating and proving a fraud, I just found very, very exhilarating. But what really added to it was that, here we're helping this nonprofit organization recover money that had been stolen from it, basically. So there's that mission element of it, basically, this is the right thing to do. And if I can help organizations or help individuals, through this work, that's just such an added bonus. It just adds a whole nother layer to what I'm doing in life. And
the nonprofit had no idea about it.
None whatsoever.
So you just, as part of your audit, you did some sampling or something, and you just kind of, something didn't smell right, and you dug into it and you saw, man, these guys are just freaking robbing these guys blind. Yeah.
I think as I recall, this is a while ago now, but I think what I initially saw was something that looked like it had already been billed. Something that was like, didn't I see this on a previous invoice? And I went back and said, sure enough, this is exact same thing. And as still a fairly junior auditor, I thought, okay, there must be a reason.
Well, totally. You've already done 1,000 audits and you don't find anything.
Yeah, exactly. And then moving ahead a few years, what really then got me then on the path of compliance is if you do enough fraud investigations.
So sorry, can I pause you there? So you were just sort of a financial auditor, and then you said, man, I really like this sort of, was it kind of forensic accounting, or was it really just, it was that? Okay. So how did you make that pivot into forensic? Did they have a group inside your organization, or did you go somewhere else, or what?
At the time, they didn't really have a designated group. fairly quickly evolved into that.
Yeah.
But at the time, it was just like, oh, you're an auditor, and now we're going to do this they called it litigation support at the time. It's just like
Okay.
do litigation support work, and it's a lot of the same skills. At the time, the fraud field still hadn't developed enough of its own sort of curriculum, if you
To
will.
have its own sort of ring fence or something. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Well,
And
that's
which
cool.
it really now does. Yeah.
Kind of
So
figuring it out as you go then in a
yeah,
lot of
oh,
ways.
exactly. That's exactly what it was. Kind of figuring out, okay, and as the audit background is very good for that, of course, because you're already kind of looking at and become developing an expertise in how things work and what
Right.
processes and internal controls and things like that. And forensics is really an extension of that. It really is. And then you just add some additional sub skills to that.
Yeah.
So
It's kind
it
of
was,
like a black belt of it or something. Or yeah, I like what you said. It's like the French cuisine of like cooking or something. You know what I mean? It's like higher end. It's high, it's harder. It's like a deeper application of that technical prowess.
Yeah, it really is. It really is. And the training that you get in auditing to look at internal controls is, of course, extremely helpful because even in a fraud case, you still are going to have to explain it to someone as to how this person did what they did. It's not enough to simply show, oh, they stole $1 million. To legally, work, you have to say, how did they do it? What did they take advantage of?
Right.
So you really have to dive into the process part of it very, very extensively. Yeah. So, if you do enough fraud investigations, you eventually bump into compliance issues. And I'd already been doing some compliance auditing along with the financial auditing, because I was at the time then doing some work in Washington, D.C., where a lot of the clients were either government contractors or not-for-profits using federal funds. So there was a financial and a compliance piece to the audits that we were doing. So I was doing compliance auditing before we really even started calling it compliance auditing. It was, there was other terms for it. But long and short of it, though, is when you find fraud, if it's simply just an employee stealing from a company, that's usually not a compliance violation, other than a violation of the code of conduct, of course.
Sure, right.
The given. But violating other laws, usually not, unless there's certain characteristics in place. Like if you have, let's go back to that defense contractor or nonprofit organization, and let's say an employee is stealing from that organization. But that theft has to get charged somewhere in the books, right? So it's a disbursement somewhere that it shows up as an expense or something on the books. Now, if that money ends up getting accidentally billed to the government, now all of a sudden you got a compliance issue on your hands. Now the organization is also in trouble for billing the government for fraud. For a fraud perpetrated by an employee, but nonetheless, it's getting billed back to the government. So you've got a major compliance issue on your hands. So that was my initial exposure to then compliance as sort of an area beyond just what had previously been more mundane kinds of compliance things, like did the cost get charged to the right account, and did they serve eligible people and things
right.
like that.
Right.
Yeah. But that's what really got me then in the heavier into the compliance part.
So what was it about the what was it about, maybe zooming back just a little bit, but what was it about accounting that kind of attracted you to it? And what was it about these other couple of lily pads that we just talked about that kind of kept you in it? Because there's some things that you were obviously, that you encountered in your undergrad that you're like, okay, I want to kind of go auditing. And there's some things you found in auditing that you're like, okay, I really like this sort of fraud thing, right? And as you've gotten sort of deeper and deeper into this cave or this tunnel or something, what are the things that kind of along the way really resonated with you that kept you in this space and that kept you kind of exploring deeper?
Yeah, I think it comes back to that sort of a combination of this kind of technical challenge. I'm naturally kind of an analytical person, so there's a logic to accounting, of course. You just go to that very beginning. There's a lot of logic to accounting, and it's not simple logic. It's complicated. So many people that start taking accounting classes in college or university, they quickly get out of that. They say, that's not for me.
Hmm.
Not because it simply just seems weird. It's an odd thing. It's like when learning a foreign language. It doesn't make sense to you at first. That first semester, even second semester of accounting, it still isn't coming together. But I
Hmm.
could tell that we were going down a path, so it kept me going. So when you think about it, that same sort of logic of what appealed to me, kept going after college then. Of saying, okay, I know there's something deeper here, so let's keep pursuing this. And I'm not sure which angle. I was open to taking different paths. Like I said, my initial path was I wanted to be a chief financial officer after serving in public accounting for a couple of years. But then I saw these other paths open up, and I thought this is even cooler. I really, really like this because it appealed to the technical side, the analytical side, but also had more of a mission to it. It really
Yeah.
had a mission. It's like, hey, I can help people, I can help organizations now by doing this. It's not simply stamping out audits any longer. It's really diving into helping.
It's a very interesting answer. I'm a CPA myself and I went that similar route and my motivation is a little different than yours. Um, I did like that you could always get to an answer. Like there's always an answer, right?
Yeah.
And there's always a way, and I found maybe I'm a crappy CPA. I am, but there's kind of like 7 underlying principles of accounting. And like, even if you don't know this particular problem, you can kind of infer what the answer probably is based on the application of those principles. If you know those principles, they show up kind of all over the place. And for me, it was really like, I felt like I was, I felt like I was in that forest to get through the forest to get to entrepreneurship or to, on the investing side or something else. And it's interesting the way you kind of talked about it, that like you just enjoyed the forest. You were walking through that forest. Like this is a great place to kind of be. It really resonated with a lot of the way that like you were wired. And then you found these new sort of paths where you're like, wow, I can sort of apply these unique skills that I've built, this technical knowledge, this, ability, this, whatever, this perspective to really help people and to help, drive toward more goodness or drive toward more, I don't know. I think that's the word, like just to make a situation better.
I think so. And I think, maybe one other factor that comes into play is, and I'm sure saw this, one of the potential, risks, if you will call it that, of going into accounting is it can become repetitive.
Totally.
If you get into, bookkeeping and then senior accountant and even CFO in some organizations, it's a very repetitive kind of a thing. And then auditing itself can become very repetitive.
Totally.
And of course, the auditing profession changed significantly to require much more rigidity in the audits, for legal liability and protection purposes. So it became less of using your brain and more of knowing how to fill out the checklists and the forms.
Totally.
I think part of what attracted me to then these other paths was it wasn't repetitive. Every fraud investigation was unique. Every compliance investigation is unique. And then when you go from that to then the preventive work, which is more of what I do now, even that, every situation is unique.
Yeah. And as you go down that path, to your point, you're just like seeing so many different looks. You know what I'm saying? You're seeing so many different situations and all that is kind of falling in, building your context window and building your pattern recognition to where the preventative work that you do can be so much more, I don't know, robust,
Yeah. Oh, it absolutely can. It absolutely can. It teaches you going through it, it teaches you sort of a logic and a process that you apply to.
Yeah. You build your own principle set or something.
Yeah. Yeah. And you learn to not fall in love with your own theory too fast too.
Yeah. Right.
Like once you get into the training and the educational piece of proper investigating and analysis and everything, you learn, I think you're more self-aware of your own biases and your own little tendencies to hopefully, pull yourself out, from those before it's too late.
So fast forward a little bit, you start to kind of get into compliance. What were some of the major sort of milestones in that path before you ran what I think is the largest compliance organization in the world?
Yeah, good question. And I think I mentioned a couple of them, the big milestones of kind of going from auditing into forensics and things of that nature. I had a couple of great mentors along the way. My very first person that I worked for in public accounting was just such a good educator. I loved working with him. He just really taught me how to help the clients, not just do an audit, but to really get more out of an audit. And then he was so well grounded in the principles. And then in the large accounting firm that I then worked for several years, the person I worked the most for was an audit partner who was born and raised in Austria and was an English teacher in Austria before she came to the United States and became an audit partner. So talk about the transition. But what I got from her was this love of communicating and writing, because she was an English teacher. So an Austrian person who was an English teacher in Austria. And she's the one that really triggered my passion for writing, because up until then, it was just like, I'm an auditor,
Right. I'm issuing one of two letters,
Yeah, exactly. Debits have to equal credits. But she taught me really how to write good management recommendations and how to communicate with management really well. And that really triggered that part of the creative part of things for me. So there were several of these sorts of milestones, if you will, kind of a combination of random events that I took advantage of. And so, hey, this is cool. I'm going to go down this path, to then having run across, people who I really benefited from, including when I was leaving the big CPA firm to start my own practice. The managing partner at that practice set me up with my first client.
Wow.
Nothing vindictive about, oh, you're leaving me, so, the heck with you. He was just like, hey, Gerry, I think I've got a great opportunity for you.
That's awesome.
Now that you've announced that you're going to be leaving me, I also have a great opportunity for you. So he set me up with this government agency. It was actually with the Small Business Administration to do receivership work, forensic accounting in the receivership office for all these businesses that had gone into receivership for violating Small Business Administration lending, rules.
Cool.
So he set me up beautifully to.
How great is that? I mean, talk to me a little bit about, was that a big decision to go and start your own?
It's oddly, I think this goes back to that willingness to take risk, because I didn't really think anything of it, and here we were.
What prompted it?
Just a desire to see something else. I could see that where I was, I had a marvelous future. In hindsight, I probably would have, from a purely financial standpoint, I would have made a heck of a lot more money in my life if I
just staying on that partner track or something.
Yeah, because I was clearly, probably second, third in line to be the next partner in that office, and it was a big office. So partner with a big CPA firm, obviously, there's a lot of compensation there.
Totally.
But I still wanted that, carving out something for myself, new challenges, willing to take some risk along the way. So I took that jump.
Man, it's so interesting because, well, let me ask you, it's not like everybody who goes through public accounting, is like, oh, I'm going to go and do my own thing. To your point, there's a certain rarity to that willingness to take risk in that field, right? Archetypes that go into that field in general, I think there's a lot more sort of conscientiousness and steadiness that those personality types are kind of attracted to it. And so I don't know. I think it's really cool. I think somebody who gets out of that when they're on such a successful path, it says a lot about their willingness to take risks and, do something else.
Yeah. I mean, it's the term that auditors use with their clients, and then they put it in their communications and everything, is reasonable assurance.
Right.
And the audit mindset is one of I want reasonable assurance in everything I do.
Yeah, they want a low standard deviation of outcome.
Yeah, exactly. You ask an auditor if they love you, and they will give you reasonable assurance that they love you.
It's pretty good.
It's just the mindset there, but there's that comfort zone, and so you're right. It's just like whatever it was, and I don't think I necessarily got that from my parents, because neither of them were big risk takers necessarily, but something else was at play there.
And what's your birth order?
I am the third of three boys.
Okay.
Yeah, so maybe it's the third kid who admittedly had the easier life growing up than my two older brothers. There's clearly, whether they had softened my parents up enough,
Yeah, that happens.
uh,
Yeah. I
or
mean,
what.
but you kind of do see a risk aversion drop on birth order.
Yeah.
You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
Yeah.
That could
Yeah.
be a
You
part
tend
of
to
it.
be, like our middle brother is the classic biggest risk taker. He's the one that became the Navy jet fighter pilot, and where every time you're flying, you have a risk of not coming
Totally.
back.
Yeah.
So he was
But
probably the ultimate
but
risk.
you get the benefit of seeing, as a child, you get the benefit of seeing like, okay, do this. Okay, don't do that. You can really learn from the wisdom of those who kind of went before you in some ways.
Exactly. Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. So there's never been a big fear of risk.
Yeah. So you're doing this receivership work for SBA. Where do we go from there? And what were the big lessons from that chapter that you still have been able to sort of stand on today and carry forward into, the industry, as we move forward now?
Probably a couple of lessons that came from that. One is just learning how to manage teams, because up until then, I was being managed, and then I would have, some people working for me on an audit. But now all of a sudden, I was the owner of a business, and
Yeah, you're cutting checks.
yeah, I grew that business to about 25 people.
Wow.
Brought in a partner, so a good friend of mine who was also at that same CPA firm, he joined me then a couple of years after I left.
Wow.
And we just had, all those lessons associated with entrepreneurship.
1,000 lessons there.
Oh my gosh, learning how to finance your business on Visa and MasterCard, all those things that small businesses go through.
Yeah.
How are we going to make payroll this week? How much money do I want to cash advance on these? It's like that tight, because we launched a business in the middle of a recession. It was fun. It was a blast though, and there's all those things that you learn from it to finally end up saying, hey, now a bank will actually lend us money. We've proven it.
Now that I don't need it, they'll give it to me,
Yeah. Oh, exactly. Yeah. It's like, well, if you have $100,000 in the bank, we'll give you $100,000 loan. It's like, well, why do I need a loan?
Exactly. Exactly. Where were you when I was cash advancing on my visas?
Yeah. So yeah, it was that, how to hire people, how to train people. I think that's what also then got me into this passion for training, because that became a segment of our business. I started doing training seminar, public and private training seminars, mainly geared towards CPA firms, and then towards, CFOs and others, in businesses. So I developed several 1 and 2 day workshops on everything from accounting and auditing issues to financial management. Then gradually got it more into like fraud training, risk management training.
Was that market driven, or was that just your inkling on what gaps needed to be filled, or what?
Yeah, it's funny because it was kind of a combination of where are my strengths and then where else can these lead me? Because I was always, kind of, and I still am sort of a lifelong learner. Like what's the next step? Now that I've mastered this part of auditing, what's next? Now that I've mastered this part of fraud, what's next? Where
are we in the timeline right now? Like what years were this? Your business is 25 people.
Like maybe 15 years into my career.
Okay.
Yeah. So I'm in my late 30s, early 40s, and adding these other things into the portfolio. I had heard of, and this probably goes back even earlier than that, probably about the 10 or 12 year mark is when the Association of Certified Fraud Examiners was beginning to take off. And then joined their faculty, so it was really, really cool. All of a sudden I got to become a trainer for the Association of Certified Fraud Examiners. So I was training their courses. So in addition to me writing some of my own, and again, at about the 10, 12 year mark is when I joined the ACFE, then I probably became part of their faculty at about the 20 year mark.
Gotcha.
Yeah. So I'd already been doing some of my own workshops, going to ACFE events, talking with them, developing some relationships there. So then that led to, doing that sort of higher level kind of training. In other words, a highly specialized form of training, different types of fraud courses and things like that, which then, of course, if you move that forward several years helped me in developing courses at the Society of Corporate Compliance and Ethics.
Yeah. So how did you bridge into that? You had your own practice, 25 people, you're building these courses, and then fast forward, you're running this massive organization. That's really where I've learned so much about this space from those events and stuff like that. So how did you bridge into that?
Yeah, and there's probably a couple chapters in there that I've left out, so I'll quickly fill those in. Because at one point, a very, very good friend of mine who was the CEO of a large international scientific society, she was asking me, "Can you come and be my number two for a while?" And the key was for a while, knowing this wasn't a permanent thing.
Interim.
Yeah. So this interim gig turned out to be, I don't know, about 3 years or so as the number two for the scientific society. But that's what then gave me this real this taste then for, hey, wait a second, if you're at that level of running a professional membership organization, this is really cool.
Yeah.
And keep in mind, one thing I didn't mention is that a significant number of my clients were professional associations because of Washington, D.C., where so many of them are headquartered.
Right.
So I had already had, so this interest in associations had started very early in my career.
It started kind of creeping in.
Yeah.
Isn't it so funny? You can look back and see how these different sort of dots connect, but in real time, you're just kind of doing things,
You've summed it up beautifully, because I remember, I have distinct memory. I took my niece, who was at the time 20 years old. She joined me. We took a trip together, and it was one of the best times I've ever had. But somewhere along that trip, she says, "Your career seems so well planned out." She said, I'm a junior in college. She said, "I have no idea what I want to say, but yours is, you planned it so well." I said, "Kelly, I'm
Mr. Magoo in my way through this.
Credit me with planning here." It was planning. I was routinely throwing out plans. In fact, it's like, "Oh, this will work." And then, no, here's this other opportunity. So it's a matter of keeping your eyes open for the right opportunities, and not just jumping at anything, of course, but recognizing opportunity when it presents itself.
Yeah, and having the risk appetite to pursue it.
Yeah. Because, to your point, your question that where we got into this was how you go from a 25-person firm to then the Society of Corporate Compliance and Ethics. The interim step there was firing myself from my firm, and turning it over to my partner. And then I took this interim gig, with the Scientific Society that lasted a few years. And then after that, joined another big CPA firm, because I recognized one thing I didn't have on my tool belt, as a fraud and compliance investigator and prevention, specialist, was some of the really big company kinds of issues. I had been really working with small to mid-sized companies. Mm-hmm. I hadn't done, a big Foreign Corrupt Practices Act investigation or anything like that. So I basically took that step, went into one of the large firms, and spent, the next 3-4 years there, where I did get exposure to the publicly traded companies, working on financial statement fraud cases, Foreign Corrupt Practices Act investigations, things like that.
And to what end was that decision made? Where were you going with that?
I wanted to, at the time, I was thinking I wanted to go back to having my own practice, but with
But you got it.
And the experience, you'll say, yes, I've done this.
Gotcha.
I've worked with the Securities and Exchange Commission on financial statement fraud cases. I worked with DOJ and FCPA cases, things like that I hadn't been able to say before, even though I knew I was a darn good investigator and forensic accountant and knew compliance, but I hadn't worked on those kinds of cases.
Yeah. And that's the first question guys ask if they're going to consider you for something,
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I was tired of hearing that, in fact, So
you're like, no, just trust me. Just take a bet on me,
Yeah. I'm really good. Believe me.
Yeah. I've been betting on myself my whole life,
So really, it was around that time then, after a few years with that big firm in their global forensics practice, that, I read the announcement that Roy Snell was going to retire from the Society of Corporate Compliance and Ethics, and they were launching a search for a replacement. And I said, well, that's really fascinating. That's a really interesting organization.
Yeah.
We're on the side.
Did you know much about it before you read that?
Yeah, well, I knew plenty about SCCE because I had gotten certified there, 15
Yeah,
years
gotcha. Okay.
earlier. Yeah, so I knew of them, had been to a couple of their conferences, but didn't really think anything about pursuing that opportunity until my wife nudged me. She
Really?
She said, "Hey, idiot, you've got a lot of what they
This is
might
perfect for you.
want." Yeah, I said, "You've got the fraud and compliance background, a lot of different industries. You've been training all over Europe and Asia and Africa and South America, and the CCE wants, sounds like they want to grow global." And my whole thing was, well, they're going to stick with an in-house compliance person. They're never going to hire me, because they're going to want someone who went through that track. But she talked me into it. Yes, I was saying, "All right, I'll apply." And I put it in, and as luck would have it, they felt the same way. The search committee felt the same way, that this guy brings, the kinds of skills that we need, to move the organization forward. We don't, we want a different skill set,
Yeah.
So it appealed. So yeah, that's ultimately the story behind how I, applied for and got that job. I actually wasn't going to, and
How cool.
until my wife said, "You idiot, you
How
need
funny,
to
man.
apply
That's so
for
cool. It's cool that she saw it, and it's cool she
Oh,
felt
yeah.
comfortable calling you an idiot. You know what I mean?
Well, yeah, that comes easy.
Oh man. All right. So I want to kind of pivot now into, we can talk a little bit about the SCCE, but I want to talk a little bit about your philosophies, because I think you have this really interesting background. You've, kind of come through this sort of investigative route. You've gotten a ton of insight into what the sort of state of the art is, let's say, inside the compliance space, because you're running the sort of the two biggest, certification bodies and the two biggest sort of organizations, right? HCCA and SCCE. And so you're seeing across different, organization sizes, across industries, across different regulatory loads, the types of challenges that people have in this broad mandate that everybody has, which is to like find risk and mitigate that risk and put better systems in place to like curtail that risk from like occurring in like a sustainable way, right?
Yes.
So talk to me maybe about like some of the lessons you learned there, or some of the deeper insights that now are feeding into what you're doing now, and how you're thinking about risk across businesses, and what some of these sort of forward-thinking innovations, I'll call them innovations, but what some of this forward thinking that you're kind of bringing to our space now is sort of rooted down in.
Yeah, it's a good question, because, it wasn't until, after, being away from SCCE for a few months that some of the stuff really started coming.
Kind of congealed or something.
Yeah. But while I was at SCCE, one thing I did notice, and this isn't rocket science by any stretch of the imagination, but is that you had a lot of the exact same problems in your large organizations as you did in the small organizations.
Exactly.
This very kind of siloed approach to risk, where compliance does its thing and nothing else. In fact, not too long ago, I was advising an organization, a European organization, on their compliance and ethics function. And they showed me their compliance charter. And the compliance charter had about 2 pages associated with what the compliance function does, and about 15 pages on what it doesn't do in the charter, because this was all what they called compliance through others. So in other words, just like compliance rarely has a lot of control over human resources and IT and things, those kinds of risks that are handled elsewhere, that's how they were viewing compliance. It's like, we've got, our mandate is limited to bribery and corruption, antitrust, and like 2 others. And everything else is done through others. Yet they were supposed to be playing kind of an advisory role.
Yeah.
For this consistent application of a risk framework. And it failed miserably, of course, because no one was collaborating. None of these risk functions wanted to get out of their little silo. Silos bring comfort. And silos also are inevitable when you've got all these subspecialties. Just like years ago, money laundering wasn't a thing. It was just another aspect of fraud prevention and things like that. Yet it became a subspecialty with its own certifying body and everything. So now money laundering sits in its silo in financial institutions and doesn't talk to anybody else.
Right.
So these silos are they develop very, very naturally. I would see that in small organizations, mid-sized organizations, and even the most complex organizations.
Yeah, it's what do you think that is? You think it's just human? It's just kind of specialty breed silos. Like, I think in the old days, like in the NFL, everybody would play offense and defense. And now you got 30 different, like not 30, whatever, a dozen different teams, special teams, blah, 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 with their own coaches and their own trainers and all that kind of stuff. You see that siloing happening even on a group of 70 people who are literally wearing the same jersey. So, I mean, what do you think it is? You think it's just driven by specialization? Do you think it's driven by, what is it?
I think I just came up with a new term. I think we should call this the long snapper syndrome, because remember in the NFL when the long snapper became a thing?
Yeah.
The guy that only comes out to snap the football for punts and field goals. That's his
right.
He's not the.
Yeah.
It used to be that the center who's out there for every play on offense would then also be the snapper that would hike the ball for field goals and punts. Then all of a sudden, the long snapper.
He just does this one thing.
Yeah. That one of those 55 or whatever people on the team, is going to be the long snapper, and we've seen that. I think it's a natural. It's hard to avoid, and I don't think we need to avoid it, but I think it lends itself to staying in your silo, stay in your comfort zone.
Yeah.
When you think about it, even these conferences, specialty conferences, like a compliance conference or a money laundering conference, or a lot of it involves everyone crying on one another's shoulders about how horrible they have it, because we're the only ones that see our value.
Right.
I guarantee you go to other conferences and you'll see the exact.
Yeah. You go to a sales conference, people are saying the same thing. You go on Reddit and you look at, a marketing subreddit, everyone's complaining about that. I like to say that life is fair in that it's unfair to everybody. Like everybody has that exact same conversation. And it's so interesting to me when I got into the space, because I came from a different space. I got into this space and that seemed like there seemed to be a certain novelty to that. That was like a chorus that I would hear over and over, compliance is the office of no, and we don't get the budget and blah, blah, blah. And I'm just like, nobody has budget. Like everyone's complaining that they don't have enough budget. Like I've heard this same conversation hundreds of times across different sort of business archetypes, to your point.
Mm-hmm. Oh, absolutely. Yeah. It's over the past year, I was just thinking, I think I've been to 4 completely different types of industry conferences. I've been to a compliance conference, been to a fraud conference, an internal audit conference, and risk management conferences. And the exact same conversations in the hallways. Slightly different subjects, what they're talking about, but the issue being identical. Nobody loves me. We get no respect. We have no budget. Nobody sees what I see. We're underappreciated. And like, people just get the heck over it. Be the ones that reach out, to establish those connections with the silos next door,
Yeah, I love that. That's going to be a clip for sure. But it is interesting once you get out, to your point, and you hear life's hard for everybody, right? Like everyone is having those same conversations. It helps you to kind of check yourself and not kind of have your own pity party, which I don't like a pity party. Nobody even brings a gift to that. But you know what I'm saying? But yeah, that siloing, I just keep coming back to that. I love that. The long snapper syndrome, or the long snapper effect. I forget what you said, but like we see that. You probably saw it in your business that you built. At one point, you're wearing all these hats, and like there's a certain kind of, maybe when you had 3 or 4 people, everyone's kind of doing everything and everyone's kind of running in step. And like the story then is like, man, if we just had someone to handle payroll, or we just had someone to handle onboarding or something, right? Like some specialist, some long snapper to come in, you think that that's going to sort of solve everything. And in doing that, like there's a certain synergy, right, that we think happens in an organization where 1 + 1 = 3, or 1 + 1 = 1 + 1 + 1 = 5, or something like that, right? But there's also like a countervailing force that the siloing ends up kind of creating, like an anti-synergy. And like if we're not fighting against that anti-synergy, then the silo walls are going to come up, and then all the sort of potential, again, this is like an overused term a lot, but like this potential synergy is never going to get achieved. It takes someone to be that circulatory system, to your point, to knock those silos down and, remind the special teams and the offensive line and the defensive line that, hey guys, look, we all got the same logo on our hats. We all got the same logo on our shirts, and we're all trying to put the same points on the same side of the scoreboard. We in compliance, I think, have a unique opportunity to do that and be that change that can really drive an organization forward, because not every, while that same conversation is had in all these different all these different types of departments and these different industries, not every department has the same sort of potential pervasiveness or the same potential to like intersect with as many different departments as compliance does. So there is kind of a motivation, or there is kind of an opportunity for compliance to be that change and knock down those silos and start to kind of close that gap between like the synergy that's being achieved and the sort of potential theoretical synergy that could be achieved from people, attacking things sort of together instead of these individual ways,
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Because you see the same thing as a CEO too,
Yeah, right.
And to me, the managers that I think have the greatest value are not necessarily the ones that with the strongest technical skills, although it is technical,
Sure.
you have to have subject matter expertise without a doubt. But what I would always look for are those that really recognize those connections and the value of reaching across these functions, to recognize that and to really and to recognize that. Part of this gets into the key performance indicators and what your metrics are for success, and departments love to have metrics that they are in complete control of.
Right.
But the key to success is to also utilize metrics that require the collaboration. Like I cannot achieve this metric on my own, yet part of my evaluation is based on it.
Yeah. And that's such a hard one to kind of grab at, right? Because you're kind of letting go, you're letting go of some control. Yeah. It's maybe a little bit different to measure. It's definitely harder to like do a clear attribution analysis. And all those things are kind of points of risk for someone who's signing up to achieve something, It
is. You're voluntarily entering into something that could trigger some conflict.
Yeah.
And it's conflict, it's risk that is necessary to achieve, your own value and your own reward as an individual, but then also to the organization. It's a necessary risk.
Yeah. And, perhaps if you're only measuring yourself, maybe I'm kind of catching up to you a little bit here, but like if you're only measuring yourself or you're only accepting KPIs that you have 100% control over, then doesn't that just reinforce the like natural siloing? Like, aren't those walls just going to come up faster?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I've seen it before where managers try to reject any KPI that they can't completely control themselves.
I feel like I'm guilty of that sometimes myself.
Oh,
I feel like it's maybe just a human thing. Maybe I'm trying to give myself too much grace here, but
yeah,
I've seen it myself. Like I've seen it inside my own organization. I feel like I've exhibited that at times,
Mm-hmm. Yep. If people come out of the meetings, what have you, to where KPIs are set, feeling like I've got control over this, that's bad. All right, that's bad because you want the KPIs that require some collaboration, some communication, where part of your KPI is dependent upon someone else, because, just like, and we can get further into this, how those risks work the same way, in terms of relationships between different risks.
Yeah, that's a good point. Like, I would like to get into that. Man, this is I feel like we're getting down to some real gold here, because there's a certain comfort in, again, I'm talking about this from a straight compliance perspective. You said it before, silos are cozy. There's no wind getting into the silo. You know what I'm saying? This is your own little hovel or whatever. Mm-hmm. And there's some comfort in only kind of attaching to KPIs that I have 100% control over. That ends up reinforcing this thing that we've all heard, and you've heard probably more times than I have, that compliance is apart from the business, not a part of the business. Right. So really the only like antithesis to that, or the only sort of antidote to this tendency that might be a human sort of self-preservation type tendency, is really to connect what you're doing to like the broader organizational objectives. And I think in doing that, not only do you knock some of those silo walls down, not only is that a way to sort of carve some windows in your silo so, all the mold doesn't grow. I don't know, my analogy is kind of breaking down a little bit, but I feel like it also helps you become more a part of the business, and it helps you frame out whatever your compliance initiatives are in terms that other folks care about. And that seems to be a continued, I've been in this space for like a decade now, and that seems to be like a last mile that we consistently are not really good at sort of bridging, or that, that's a chasm that like we have not as an industry sort of figured out how to do in a consistent way, insofar as like these old monikers and these old stereotypes are still being talked about, Office of No, anti-business department, and so forth. When, if you zoom out of this whole conversation, to the extent that compliance helps to like reduce risk in an organization, well, that is all bottom line enhancing. So there should always be a way for us to connect what we're doing to the bottom line, or always find a way, to the extent that like organizational wide OKRs are meant to like increase enterprise value. We should always figure out there's always some kind of credible way, I think, to connect whatever our initiatives are to those things that matter most to the organization. If you agree with that, why do you think we struggle with that still?
Yeah, it's interesting because I completely agree. And I've only spoken with a couple compliance professionals over the years that linked all of their compliance related activities to the company's strategic plan. Yet I think that is where it starts, because
Agree.
It doesn't require that you collaborate with anyone yet. Every compliance officer has access to the strategic plan.
Yeah, and it's just giving you it's almost giving you like a script on how that collaboration can take place when you're talking to sales or ops or whoever, So
it starts with saying, okay, what are the company-wide KPIs that are baked into the strategic plan? And what does what I'm doing in compliance contribute to that? Okay, and everything we do should be able to be linked to the strategic plan of the company and the underlying KPIs.
Yeah, right.
If we can't make that connection, maybe we're wasting our time on something that doesn't really add value. It's when you think about it, compliance is a very specialized form of risk management, and the risk management profession, oftentimes tries to make that link to value, to adding value. If you look at the COSO framework and the ISO framework and things like that, there's discussion of risk management as a function that contributes to the value of the organization. And compliance is part of risk management.
100%.
It is a specialized form of risk management. So we should be able to do that exact same thing. And that, to me, then opens the door to some potential collaboration, because initially you can do that in your own silo. You can say, okay, I'm going to spend the next 3 days just looking through our strategic plan and the company-wide KPIs, and I'm going to try to align everything we do here in compliance with those KPIs. That's how you can start beginning to show value too.
Yeah, I think it gives you at least a language, and it gives you a way to frame your initiatives in a way that's going to be compelling to somebody that's living outside your silo. And to something you said before, it's also a gut check, because there's a lot of false senses of security that exist within our space. Okay, I updated the policy. Okay, great. I'm done, right? Like, it doesn't matter unless the risk is actually reduced. It doesn't matter unless the behaviors are actually changing in the organization. And so in doing that, that's such a great sort of spring cleaning exercise to gut check and make sure that like you're spending your time on the things that matter most. And I've been on this thing lately. Of like Parkinson's law, and Parkinson's law says work fills the available time. If you have a day to clean your house, it's going to take all day. If someone's coming over in an hour, guess what? You're going to knock the whole thing out in an hour, right? Yeah. So if that's true, let's just assume that that's true. And if coupled with that, we've seen a continued, since I've been in the space, everyone's talking about they don't have budget. They have 2 headcount they've been asking for 2 years, and they can't make the case for it, or the CFO doesn't get it, or the boss doesn't think that we add enough value to justify that extra spend. And yet regulatory load has increased, guidance has increased, right? Like the scope of what compliance is sort of responsible for has continued to increase with sort of a relatively fixed sort of set of resources. Well, then what's the game? Is the game more policies, more siloing, more treading of water, spinning on this hamster wheel? Or is it making better bets with your time, making better bets on ultimately like the influence that you're having on the organization? It really shifts it. It really shifts the game away from sort of those sort of, let's call it old school, let's say 2001, kind of 1995 kind of era compliance activities, which is kind of framing the house, to really kind of now driving influence and driving that connection, to your point, knocking those silo walls down to ultimately convey, because risk management at some level is in the eye of the beholder, convey to the rest of the organization that, hey, this thing that you viewed as the Office of No is actually a very, to your point, very specialized risk mitigant, risk management operation that inherently is adding value to the bottom line, even though it might be harder to quantify each, and attribute sort of each of those efforts toward that sort of bottom line enhancement.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's when you think about every compliance related control, is tacked onto some other process.
Great.
The control itself isn't in isolation. It's part
That's
of
a great
process.
point.
And thinking of all this as a process, I've sometimes used, and it's probably a terrible analogy, but I sometimes use it, the whole idea of, a race car can go an amazingly fast, but you still need brakes and steering, to be able to live through it. So that's the compliance piece of it. It's not saying no, it's saying we can go faster if I've got good brakes, and we can go faster if I've got really good steering.
Right.
It's like we can actually go faster, accomplish more with these things built into the process. It's all part of one process. Make the fastest race car we can survive in, and achieve our goals.
Like the spoiler adds weight, but to your point, that helps keep the car on the ground. That helps you, again, to your point, go faster.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, you factor all those things in, and there's a lot of comparisons or analogies there. But yeah, it's part of a bigger process.
Do you think that people in our space don't actually believe that? Or do you think they just merely lack the boldness, fluency or persuasion skills to make that case? Like, where are we as an industry,
I have seen too many compliance professionals that seem to succumb to that, saying, well, I've been told that I'm the Department of No, so I must be the Department of No. And
right.
About it. You and I can chuckle about, yeah, we're the Department of No. It's like, no.
No, you're not. Yeah, I agree with you, man.
It's like, change it. It's like you have the ability to change this, be a bit more assertive in terms of identifying these relationships. To me, it's all about understanding relationships with KPIs, relationships with risks, and then relationships with people.
Right. Yeah. It's not like we're actually birds with wings and we're trying to convince somebody that we're a fish. Right. This is just a perception thing. This is just some experience somebody had, or some assumption somebody has about what we do that can be changed. That is very fluid. That's very influenceable. To your point, I think you're exactly right. I think it takes a boldness. It takes an added assertiveness for us to drive that forward. Yeah. Man, I feel like this should have been a much longer episode. We'll have to have you back and do something together. This was really a lot of fun. My last question, if you could go back in time, and you can't say, don't hop the fence to see those fish, what's a piece of advice you wish you could give a young version of yourself that you wish you had sooner?
Well, it's one that I've periodically had to remind myself of over my career, which is to maintain a very, very diverse collection of interests outside of what your specific profession is, because it helps in your profession.
Totally.
Whether that is art, or in my case, hiking, reading. People ask me, what compliance books have you read this past year? I said, well, only a couple, because I read a lot of other types of nonfiction and fiction and stuff, because it helps with creativity. It helps with, there's so many benefits that help.
Totally.
Job by doing things, so we've got a passion for hiking. We love trekking and all that sort of stuff, and all over the globe, and the photography that comes with it, and we've even gotten into the birding part of it and wildlife and all that sort of stuff that goes along with it. But then when I came home, it's just like, I was just looking at the books that I've been reading recently, I was like, oh my gosh, you'd think I was a crazy person, it's like,
it's all over the place. Yeah.
Yeah. I wrote a book called What an Owl Knows, and it's all written by this person who just did all this research on how owls work and how amazing they are.
They are crazy, right?
That to a great work of fiction called The Wild Dark Shore, kind of a futuristic thing with climate change and everything. And it's, but diversity in stuff that you're doing in life and then what you're doing after hours, it actually helps so much more than what people think.
I think you're so right. That's such great advice. And I wonder if that's true in every single space. It probably is. It feels particularly true here because, I just find there's so many connection points. There's so many metaphors you can draw. There's so much to any of those things. I can just imagine what some of the connections are and how that ends up feeding how you look at the world. Because anybody who says that compliance is boring, they're boring. Okay. How can it be boring? By its nature, it's not boring. By its nature, it's changing all the time. By its nature, there's all these different locks to pick and people to influence and things to drive forward. The landscape's changing all the time,
Yeah, it's as boring as you make it.
100%.
It really is. It's just like I remember walking through the hallways at SCCE, at some of these conferences, and I'd see some people walking in a session, walk right out. So, there's nothing in there for me. I can't find any sessions. It's like it's time for you to retire.
Yeah, it sounds like that's the story of your life, buddy. You know?
Yeah. I bet you've been saying that for
everything. You say that at the grocery store, don't you?
Yeah. It's like I don't need to learn anything more. I know everything, and it's like no.
And one other thing on what you just said here. Sorry to run over, but when you're doing that and you're exposing yourself to all these different things, at least for me, because I'm kind of like you, I have like a very diverse sort of set of like things I'm interested in, but it's just like a constant humbling experience to remind me that like, I don't know anything. And like the most dangerous thing in the world is someone who's quote unquote seen it all. Like you haven't seen it all. You're wrong. You're like deluded if you think you've seen it all. And that really helps to give you that beginner's mind and see more connections and really take advantage of this, this space that we're in, this life that we have.
I've always had this deep appreciation, admiration for other people's specialized skills.
Same.
And expertise. Whether it's this woman who wrote a 400-page book on owls to, anything else. And part of that, I think, was fueled by that work that I did with associations back in Washington, D.C. There's an association for everything.
Right.
Every if more than 3 people have a job, there's probably an association for it.
Right.
And they've written their own specialized journal and newsletters and things. But I love that stuff.
Same here.
If I run into somebody at a networking event or anywhere, that has some expertise that I don't have, I'm probably going to drive them crazy with questions because I just want to know more about what they do.
Right.
It's fascinating to me.
Well, listen, man, thank you so much for joining us. This was absolutely a blast. We got to do something again together soon.
Yeah, let's do that. Let's do that because we got a bunch of topics we can still get into.
Totally.
But I really enjoyed this a lot. Thank you so much, Nick. And,
absolutely.
Great seeing you again.
Likewise, man. See you next time.
Take care.